Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In this edition of GlobalPrint, I'm going to talk to you about South Asia's regional grouping called SAARC, which is the acronym for South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. And the reason that SAARC is on the agenda this week, and you can also read my column GlobalPrint on the Print's website, is because of an unusual SAARC meeting that was cancelled on the margins of the UN General Assembly last weekend. Now, you know that the SAARC Association, supposed to meet every year, hasn't met since 2014, since the summit took place in Nepal, Kathmandu. But before I get into the reasons why it hasn't met for the last 7 years and what this meeting that was cancelled at the UNGA was all about, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do consider subscribing and paying just a little bit for the Print's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. You know that we have been bringing to you the best news stories, the best videos since the onset of the pandemic over the last several months. So please do continue to support us. We count on your support. So click on the join button, pay rupees 159. It's not much money at all, but you will get benefits that subscribers are due, which non-subscribers do not get. So quickly go and click on the join button and become a subscriber. Now back to my column GlobalPrint. This week I talk about SAARC, which is an unusual subject, and what I'm going to say may shock some of you watching this video, which is that SAARC is well and truly dead, and that it's time to perform its funeral rites, light a pyre, bury it, do both. But the truth is that SAARC is dead and that the association or South Asia must move on. Now, why am I pronouncing the death of SAARC? So let's go back right to the very beginning. In 1985 December, in Bangladesh, then dictator of Bangladesh or President H.M. Ershad chaired the first summit meeting of SAARC, and there were 4 or 5 leaders from across the region that came. From India, there was Rajiv Gandhi, then Prime Minister. From Bhutan, there was the King Jigme Singye Wangchuk. From Sri Lanka, there was the President J.R. Jayawardene. From the Maldives, the dictator Maumoon Abdul Gayoom. And from Pakistan, the martial law administrator Ziaul Haq. Now, out of the 5 leaders present, 3 were dictators. So Gayoom, Ziaul Haq and the host Ershad. And guess what? 1 year later, after he hosts the SAARC Summit, Ershad wins an election in 1986. But of course, it's a rigged election. And he then continues to rule Bangladesh for the next 5 years. So that was the not so very auspicious beginning of SAARC. But we shall leave that for the time being. So 1985 is the beginning or the foundation of the SAARC Summit. And the idea was for all the nations of South Asia to come together, and let me quote the line that is sort of a foundational principle, which is the creation of an order based on mutuality of respect, equity, and shared benefits. Now, at the time, there were 7 countries that were part of SAARC. Afghanistan became a member much later. But over the years, SAARC has met occasionally. That has had many squabbles between it. Another principle is that until all countries agree to meet for the summit will not take place. So in the 2000s, for example, when Gyanendra became the king of Nepal after his brother and his nephew were all who sort of killed themselves in a massacre, a palace massacre, Gyanendra became the king of Nepal. For 2 or 3 years, India protested that move silently, and the SAARC Summit was not held. So that brings me to 2014, when the last summit was held in Nepal in Kathmandu. Now, just let's go back a little bit in 2014 itself. In May of 2014, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi becomes the Prime Minister, he invites all the leaders of all the South Asian countries to his inaugural. I hope you remember that. And that in itself is quite a significant moment, because India recognizes, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi recognizes, that there is a very deep connection, a bond, an emotional, historic, cultural, political bond between India and its neighborhood. So all these leaders are invited. At the time, Nawaz Sharif is the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Subsequently, of course, he was thrown out. He's now in exile in London. Several other changes have taken place across South Asia, but these leaders all come to Prime Minister Modi's inaugural, and in December of the same year, 2014, the summit is held. Now, since 2014, the summit has not been held for one reason or the other. And that meant that some countries within the SAARC region, for example, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and India, decided that they would form like a sub-regional quartet and continue to do things together. For example, improve connectivity between these four countries. But guess what? Bhutan had different ideas, because the standards for vehicular emissions in Bhutan are much higher. You know that Bhutan is this tiny, beautiful little kingdom, wants to protect its environment, its nature, and therefore insisted that vehicular emission standards, which are not as high in India, for example, they're quite low. And actually, the target of Bhutan's insistence was India. And so for a long time, Bhutan didn't sign on, and subsequently, I think there has been a compromise. In 2019, again, if you remember that the Pulwama attacks took place, India accused Pakistan of orchestrating those attacks, responded by attacking Pakistan deep inside in Balakot, and subsequently, of course, the very deep bitterness in the relationship between India and Pakistan has set in. Absolutely no contact, or very, very little contact between each other. So, dear viewer, SAARC is well and truly dead. And let me just give you some proof of that, if you like. And here are two pieces of evidence. The first is a World Bank study, and you should go to that because the World Bank produces these surveys and these studies quite regularly. And the World Bank has said that SAARC is the least integrated regional grouping in the entire world. So, of course, you have the European Union, which is the most integrated, with 60% of its member states trading with each other. Then you have the East Asia countries, where about 35% of the neighbors trade with each other, and this, of course, includes China, Japan, South Korea, as well as the ASEAN countries, the 10 ASEAN countries. Even Sub-Saharan Africa, guess what? Even that does more trade between itself or amongst its own member nations than SAARC does, as much as 22% intra-regional trade. But SAARC has been so bad, there has been such bitterness between all the nations for one reason or the other, primarily, of course, between India and Pakistan, that bitterness has infected the entire region. I'm sure that a lot of the other countries are fed up with this India-Pakistan rivalry, but unfortunately, nothing has been done about it by either of the two, or, of course, by the other nations as well. So, according to another aspect of this World Bank study, it is cheaper for Indian traders to trade with Brazil than with Pakistan. In fact, as much as 20% cheaper for Indian traders to trade with Brazil than with Pakistan. Now, if that's not an indication of how badly SAARC is going, then I don't know what is. But let me give you another study, one by the Brookings Institute, which is a think tank in the US in Washington, D.C. And Brookings found that India's total trade with SAARC today hovers between 1.7% to 3.8%. And the reason for this terribly low intra-SAARC trade, or India's share of this intra-SAARC trade, was protectionist policies, high cost of logistics, lack of political will, and a broader trust deficit. So there you have it. Very little trust between India and Pakistan. Very little trust, again, between Bangladesh and Pakistan. And you know that these two countries were once part of the same country, Pakistan. Very little trust between Pakistan and Afghanistan until recently. Of course, until the Taliban regime took Kabul on the 15th of August. Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, very little trust between India and Nepal. I think India and Bhutan have a good relationship, but apart from that, the other countries seem to be either in a state of benign hostility with each other or active disagreement. Now, so guess what has happened? And since nature abhors a vacuum, since SAARC has not been able to take off, other groupings have come to take its place. So, for example, you've had the BIMSTEC or the Bay of Bengal Community, which means that India is looking east towards the Southeast Asian nations like Thailand and Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia. Bangladesh, of course, is also part of this. So the eastern part of South Asia plus the some parts of ASEAN, not East Asia, not India, not China, Japan, South Korea. So you've had what is called the Bay of Bengal or the BIMSTEC community. Then if you move towards the west of South Asia, there is a grouping called the CASA 1000, which is actually an electricity transmission project between Central Asia and Pakistan. CASA is Central Asia, and CA stands for Central Asia, and South Asia is, but the project ends in Pakistan. Then there is, of course, the CPEC, which is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor between China. It begins in the Karakoram range and goes all the way down to Pakistan, across Pakistan to Gwadar. And the Belt and Road Initiative, China, which has pushed this initiative across all of South Asia except India and Bhutan have not signed on to this Belt and Road. So what does this show to you, dear viewer? As SAARC has shrunk and shriveled up within itself, China has become a much more active player. Now, China is a rising power both militarily and economically. It has a checkbook commensurate to its size. So, for example, when Xi Jinping, the president, went to Bangladesh in 2016, he cut a check of $26 billion without so much as shrugging his shoulders. And the point that he was trying to make is that China is ready to go out of its way to improve Bangladesh's infrastructure, whether it's roads, highways, bridges, all kinds of things. And Bangladesh, of course, was very willing to be able, for another country to be able to do that. So again, you have this India-China rivalry in SAARC, and you can see this in every country in the region. And of course, we've talked about how China and Sri Lanka, for example, have an increasingly close relationship. So this Brookings study also notes that China has increased its exports to SAARC from $8 billion in 2005 to $52 billion in 2018, a growth of a humongous 546%. So that brings me full circle as to why the SAARC meeting on the margins of the UNGA in New York last weekend was cancelled. Now, what happened was that the SAARC leaders were all supposed to meet, but Pakistan said that the representative of the Taliban regime should be invited to the SAARC meeting at the UN. A lot of the other countries protested, not just India, but several others as well. There was no unanimity about that decision. In fact, India suggested that let's keep a symbolic, an empty chair that's symbolic of the fact that SAARC has not been able to agree on who should be invited from Afghanistan. But Pakistan refused to listen. They just wanted the Taliban regime, representative of the Taliban regime. Now, this shows that SAARC cannot agree on something as basic and simple as this. Some of you may argue that it's not basic and simple, that the Taliban have applied for accreditation at the UN itself, that they want to be recognized by the UN. But having said that, what's interesting about the cancellation of this SAARC meeting at the UN, the margins of the UN, is that Pakistan wanted a representative of the Taliban regime and all the other countries said no. So what's the moral of the story? As Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he's been back from his first visit abroad. It's been about a week or so now. He went to the US to participate not just in the Quad Summit, which we've talked about earlier, but also with Joe Biden, the US president. There is an impression gaining ground that that India is so tired of its neighborhood, of the squabbles, the internecine sort of struggle, if you like, within the neighborhood, that it would rather jump over South Asia and connect with the other more powerful countries of the world, whether it's France, the US, UK, Germany, Russia, anybody else except SARC. But the truth is that as India enters its 75th year of independence, there is no alternative but to live with your neighbors. You cannot choose your neighbors. That's the geographical fact that India has battled with for so many years, for 75 long years, but must come to terms with. It must revive this moribund grouping. Otherwise, guess what? The Chinese will take over. So do read my column, Global Print, on the Print's website, and let me know what you think about this video. Thank you so much for watching.